Hey friends, today we are going to talk about getting fat on purpose. Alright, welcome back to my channel. This is Barbells and Bar Charts. My name is Austin. For those who are new here, I'm on a 13-month journey to get in the best shape of my life before my 40th birthday. And when I started off 8 weeks ago, I didn't really have much of a plan. I just had some quick workouts that I had thrown together myself, and I started lifting in my basement. It became quickly apparent to me that I was not in the greatest shape. I had quit lifting a couple of months earlier, and I needed something to help me with my recovery, and I needed something to help me get my strength back. So I started creatine at the beginning of November, and 2 weeks into my whatever this is, I got on ChatGPT and I had it spin up a 6-week mini bulking program. And the idea of the mini bulking program was that it was going to be a clean bulk. We were going to be just very lean, maybe maintain weight, maybe add 3 pounds. So on paper, this was a really good plan. And when your plan is good on paper, that's when you should recognize that your future self is looking back at you in awe. Okay, so the first thing that went wrong was that I had started in the middle of the month, and I based my grocery budget off of a monthly budget. And I'm not just feeding myself, I'm feeding myself and my 3 kids. So we were already halfway through the month, and I had already bought the bulk of my groceries, and now ChatGPT is telling me to go out and buy a whole bulking diet, which is a bunch of meat and a bunch of carbs and a bunch of whey, which are all kind of, well, the carbs aren't, but when you buy that amount of carbs, it gets pretty pricey. So I was already kind of priced out of actually buying the diet that was prescribed to me in the first 2 weeks. But I was like, that's no problem. I am a meat eater. I keep meat in the house. I'll I'll make do with what I already have. So I was not following exactly the prescription from ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is a robot, not a dietitian. I'm not paying ChatGPT, so I'm not really too concerned about listening to it exactly, right? So the next thing that I didn't really take into account is that was also the latter half of November. What happens in the latter half of November? One of my favorite holidays, Thanksgiving. Now, I wasn't too concerned. I was bulking. I wasn't too concerned about being really worried about my calorie intake over the holiday. I also didn't intend on eating an entire Costco pecan pie over the course of 4 days. But here we are. But overall, the biggest problem that I was having was was meal prepping itself. So that was just the first 2 weeks. December rolls around, I go to the grocery store, I get the bulking foods that I need, and I'm ready to put the system into place. The problem is I just never found time to prepare the food so that I could reliably eat it. And I'm not used to eating 6 times a day, so it was just kind of a scheduling chaos. And I'm actually a really big fan of the phrase, you shouldn't say, I don't have time for that. You should say, I'm not prioritizing that, or I won't be prioritizing that. But the caveat to that when you're a busy parent is that anything that you're prioritizing, also you're sacrificing something else. So if I wanted to meal prep, first thing on Saturday, well then I'm not spending Saturday morning with the kids. If I wanted to meal prep on Monday during the day, well then I'm meal prepping during work. If I want to meal prep at night after the kids go to bed, I should be getting ready for bed. So there's no perfect time for me to meal plan. So there was no perfect week for me to have reliable meals prepped. So that kind of ensued into a compounding chaos of I have all of these high protein, high calorie, fiber and carb dense bulking foods on top of, holiday junk food. And then we compound on this all of the chaos of life. It's November here in North Carolina. That's hunting season. So, I can't really go by a strict eating 6 times a day bulking plan. There are no microwaves in the woods. Or if there are microwaves in the woods, they're with the deer, because I didn't see the deer either. So the end result is that where I intended on gaining about 3 pounds maximum, just because the bulk got pretty dirty, I ended up gaining about 10 pounds. Now, some of that can be attributed to, creatine. A lot of that is probably also going to be bloat. This was a 6-week bloat, not a 6-week bulk, because I did increase my fiber a lot and I was eating a lot of junk food. But overall, I was just, eating too much. So if I was going to give myself a grade for my first mini bulk, I would say that execution, I get a D. Results, I get a C, maybe a C plus. Because while I did gain too much weight, the goal was to gain weight, so I guess technically I'm an overachiever. But I also did gain muscle mass. I also did add weight to all of my lifts. I am recovering a lot better than I was 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. And I was able to get through my holidays without having too much food stress, which when I was counting calories last year, there was a lot of food stress.
So let's take a look at the dashboard to really dive into the results of the bulk. So I started out at a body weight of 248.9 pounds with a body fat percentage of 33 pounds. My scale is probably not the most accurate, it's just a bathroom scale, but it does give me something, and I'm over 30% body fat, so that's all I need to know. I've got room to reduce. And 156 pounds of muscle. So throughout the bulk, I did, you can see here on the average trend line that my weekly averages steadily increased, and there was a big spike in mid-November. I will call that the pecan pie spike. Definitely a big spike, and then a decrease in both weight and body fat percentage. So that's kind of the bloat that I was referring to, where obviously I was eating a lot of holiday foods, I was eating a lot of junk foods, I was eating a lot of pecan pie. I cannot stress that enough. And so just kind of I got carried away. I'll admit that. I freely admit that. And so I did spike, and I never really came back down from that spike. So the bulk ended up with me gaining, the weekly average, it was 9.25 pounds. The actual came out to about 9.5 pounds with a 1.5% of body fat gain, but also 3 pounds of muscle mass. So, I can take that. So let's take a look at the lifts. The question really that can't be answered here is whether or not I was going to make these kind of gains anyway. I am just getting back used to lifting. I'm not really gaining new strength, so I don't expect anybody has ever put on 95 pounds onto their deadlift in the course of 2 months. My deadlift has been 330 pounds before. I was just starting out really cautious because I felt terrible when I first started. So I was gaining my confidence back in the gym, and having those extra calories really did help me at least have that confidence, even if it wasn't doing much. And you can definitely see it in my lifts. My deadlift went up 95 pounds. My squat, I got up to 250, but then I started having some hip issues and some mobility issues. So I consulted with ChatGPT about that, and we reduced it back down and changed the way that I was lifting for my squats and changed some of the prehab that I was doing. So my squats are actually lower than where they started, but that's okay. Bench press has gone up to 245 from 185. That's a 60-pound increase. Again, huge increase. My rows, historically have always been one of my not great lifts. Still hanging out at 175, but still a 30-pound increase over 2 months. I'm willing to take that.
So honestly, I don't regret it. I wouldn't do it again, but I don't have any regrets. So next week I will be starting a 100-day cut, and I am taking lessons from my mini bulk and applying it to the cut. In the bulk, I didn't suffer from a discipline problem. I suffered from a system problem. So I need to set up the systems that are going to make the cut successful. So my groceries will be pre-planned and non-negotiable. I will set up specific times close to the grocery shopping day to meal prep, so that when I buy a whole flat of ground beef, it goes immediately into being cooked for the week instead of being portioned out or just thrown into the freezer and forgotten about. As far as the actual eating goes, I'm going to set reminders on my phone and set reminders on my other devices to remind me that I actually need to eat. I tend to be pretty flexible within my working schedule, and I try to be pretty flexible within my life, and sometimes that just means that I forget to eat. Sometimes that means that I put off eating too much until I turn into a grumpy bear. So, I just got to reel that in and actually just start eating at the same time every day to kind of build that discipline and build that system. But then also within that system, I also need to plan for, non-model days, non-average days. So I'm sure there's going to be a celebration in there somewhere. I'm sure there's going to be a night out with my friends in there somewhere. So I need to be able to plan ahead for those so that it doesn't derail my week. Because as we all know, there's no such thing as perfection. So flexibility is far superior to perfection every time. Next, I'll outline the cut that's coming up. I'm going into phase 2 of my training as outlined by my AI fitness assistant. We'll talk about what's changing, what's staying the same, and maybe a little bit more about pie.